Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
And it's time for the Bellator 199 preview and predictions. This Bellator 199 event is going to be held in San Jose, California, and it's going to air Saturday, May 12th, which is very interesting. This is a Saturday Bellator card. Normally Bellator are on Friday nights, but since this Bellator is going to be on Saturday, they're going to have UFC 214 to compete with, as well as Vasyl Lomachenko is boxing. I think he's got a pay-per-view. Not sure who his opponent is. I'm more of an MMA guy, but I do know Vasyl Lomachenko is one of boxing's biggest stars. So between two pay-per-views, I'm not sure if Vasyl Lomachenko's fighting on pay-per-view, but between the UFC pay-per-view, the boxing event, and Bellator 199, there's going to be a lot of combat sports going on this weekend, which is probably why, low-key, I didn't even realize this Bellator event was on this Saturday. I've been, paying more attention to UFC 214, and I didn't even know about the Vasyl Lomachenko event either coming into today. I knew about the Ryan Bader versus King Mo fight. I knew about the Paul Daly versus John Fitch fight. I knew about these fights. I just didn't realize they were this Saturday, the same night as UFC 214. Now, with that being said, let's get into the main card breakdown. I'm going to cover the 5 fights on the main card of Bellator 199, starting with the first fight of the night between Adam Piccolotti and Carrington Banks. Now, with that being said, Adam Piccolotti is 9-2 as a professional. Carrington Banks is undefeated, 7-0 as a pro. Adam Piccolotti in this fight, he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak. He, I believe, lost to Brendan Ward and then David Rickles. If not Brendan Ward, Adam Piccolotti, who did he lose to? Okay, yeah, it wasn't. I was thinking of who was originally scheduled to face. I think Adam Piccolotti was going to be fighting Brendan Ward, but David Rickles took that fight on short notice. So he's coming off a loss to David Rickles, Adam Piccolotti, and before that he lost to Goiti Yamauchi. But Adam Piccolotti is 9-2, though his only 2 professional losses. He's going to be facing a very high-level wrestler in Carrington Banks this fight. I've actually got Carrington Banks winning the fight, as you can see. Piccolotti had trouble taking down David Rickles, who wrestled a little in high school, but admittedly didn't take it very seriously. While Carrington, he's been wrestling since he was 7 years old, all the way through college. I believe he was a high school wrestling champion, college wrestling champion. So Carrington Banks wrestling is going to be very high level in this fight. Bellator's got a lot of those guys, very high level wrestlers, probably not the most well-rounded fighters yet, but they're very young in their game, and they're going to work on that in Bellator, through Bellator. So you see a lot of these very high level wrestling guys. They've also got a really high level jiu-jitsu guys over in Bellator. UFC's really got the best guys in the world as far as already mixed the martial arts, as far as well-rounded fighters, but Bellator's got some of the best wrestlers, some of the best jiu-jitsu guys under their banner. So that makes for interesting matchups, and that's what we have in Carrington Banks. Carrington Banks is a very high-level wrestler, so I'm going to be picking him to get this fight. He thoroughly dominated his last opponent. I watched that fight before I made this prediction with his wrestling. He only has 2 finishes in his 7 wins. He's only got 7 pro fights, and he's undefeated, so he's got 7 wins. Only 2 of those are finishes, so he's got 5 decisions. He's going to be fighting Piccolotti, who's going to have the home crowd advantage as well. Adam Piccolotti's fighting out of California, but I don't think the crowd's going to be enough to help Piccolotti get this W. I don't think that burst of energy he might get from the crowd is going to be enough to get out of Carrington Banks' relentless wrestling. So I think Carrington Banks is going to win this fight with his grappling. I'm not predicting a finish or anything like that. Probably going to be a decision, but I know Carrington Banks is probably going to start looking for finishes sometime soon. You don't want to be a guy that's got 2 finishes and 30 decisions, that's not really easy to sell. So if you're a guy that wants to, really make a name for yourself, you're going to have to start getting some of those finishes sometime soon in the future. But as of right now, Carrington Banks, I'm picking him to get the win over Adam Piccolotti at Bellator 199. Next, we've got a heavyweight fight between Cheick Kongo and Javi Ayala. Cheick Kongo, a very experienced heavyweight veteran. He's been fighting for a while now for Bellator. I think he's even fought for the UFC, as Cheick Kongo is 42 years old. He's got 27 wins, 10 losses, and 2 draws in his career. So he's got 39 pro fights, almost 40 pro fights. So Cheick Kongo, very experienced. He's going to be taking on a much younger Javi Ayala, who is a very explosive heavyweight. And as I said, Chet Kongo's 42 years old, but he's on a 5-fight winning streak. He's going to be fighting Javi Ayala, though, who's a very athletic, explosive striking heavyweight. Javi Ayala is coming off of a loss to Roy Nelson in a fight he was winning on the feet before getting taken down and smothered by Roy Nelson's grappling in each round. Ayala did show a lot even in that loss to Roy Nelson, though. It was a really exciting fight, and it took everything in Roy Nelson's chin and his tank to defeat Javi Ayala, who's going to be fighting also with the home crowd advantage. He's fighting out of California, so this fight, I do believe that home crowd energy, you know, as far as when they cheer, if you're in a 50-50 situation, if you're in a clinch against the cage, that home crowd advantage is going to help you in those 50-50 situations. It's not going to be enough to get you out of an elite wrestler's grasp, but when you're in a 50-50 situation or you just need a quick burst of energy in a fight, that's where the home crowd advantage really helps you. So and Chet Kongo's a guy that really likes to control guys against the fence, control the clinch, you know, beat guys up in the clinch. But Javi Ayala showed he was even able to escape one of Roy Nelson's like crucifix, like mounted crucifix low-key. Roy Nelson had one of his arms pinned. He had him in a terrible position in the second round. Javi Ayala was able to buck up out of it, get up, get back to his feet, show off some more of his exciting striking. So Javi Ayala's got 10 pro wins. 9 of those are finishes. I believe 4 submissions, 5 knockouts. So he's got what it takes to finish Chet Kongo. He hit Roy Nelson, who's got one of the best chins in the heavyweight division, hard multiple times. Wasn't able to take him out, but it's hard to take Roy Nelson out. But man, a couple of those shots fucking really, even for Roy Nelson, you were like, yo, Roy Nelson might go down. Javi Ayala's got some power, very explosive in that sense. So I think if he can connect with Chet Kongo's chin a couple of times, he could very well take Chet Kongo out. If Chet Kongo's more just trying to control him, you know, in a clinch situation, I think the home crowd advantage, as well as just being very athletic and explosive, is going to help Javi Ayala in that situation. So I actually have Javi Ayala beating Chet Kongo here. Chet Kongo on a 5-fight winning streak at 42 years old. Very impressive, very experienced. Could come in here and get a W, but I'm going with Javi Ayala, actually. Next, we've got one of the best, brightest prospects in MMA, not just Bellator, in MMA, Aaron Pico, who's 2-1 in his pro career, only 21 years old. Pretty funny. He's 2-1, 21 years old. I mean, the sky's the limit for this guy, Aaron Pico, coming off 2 knockouts. He lost his first fight via first-round submission. He got caught by Zach Freeman. But the thing about Aaron Pico is he's not just getting gimme fights. He's not fighting, you know, the champion in his first pro fight. But everybody that Aaron Pico has fought has had a winning record. You know, unlike some of the other guys you see, the Dylan Dennis's of the world, some of these other guys who come in, maybe if they only have like one discipline, if they're not very well rounded, like an Aaron Pico, very high level wrestler, very high level striker. He can really do it all. So Aaron Pico's, even though he's only 21 years old and so new to professional MMA, he can beat guys with winning records. Aaron Pico's really a fucking savage on the way up. Guys like Dylan Dennis, more of a jiu-jitsu guy, not really a well-rounded mixed martial artist in that sense. You know, you give him, he's in his first fight, pro fight, fighting a guy a little bit on a losing record who's lost a couple fights to submission. So, you know, Dylan Dennis in his first pro fight fought a guy that I believe was like 2-4, maybe 3-4. And meanwhile, Aaron Pico in his first pro fight fought a guy in Zach Freeman who was 8-2. You know, so definitely nobody's gimme fight. So with that being said, Aaron Pico, since that loss to Zach Freeman, bounced back with 2 big first-round KOs. He KO'd Justin Lin, and then most recently he had that big like liver punch, you know, to the like it was like a shovel punch to the liver, to the body. Took his opponent out of commission, his most recent opponent. So Aaron Pico's a straight beast. He's going to be fighting Lee Morrison though, who's very experienced as far as mixed martial arts is concerned. Lee Morrison, Aaron Pico's 4th opponent, is 19-8. So he's already almost got 30 pro fights. It's his first Bellator fight. But Lee Morrison's nicknamed the American Bulldog. He's coming to Bellator on a 4-fight winning streak in various promotions. But he hasn't ever fought in Bellator or the UFC yet. Morrison did fight for M1, where he went 2-5 in the promotion. He was on a 3-fight losing skid before leaving that promotion. Then he went on his 4-fight winning streak before joining Bellator. Aaron Pico, though, as I said, one of the biggest prospects in MMA, lost his pro debut. Since then, 2 first-round KOs, and, you know, he's really on a mission. I don't see Aaron Pico You know, not of course he doesn't want to lose another fight, but at the same time, I'm sure he's going to be very careful, try and limit the mistakes to as little as possible in this fight, because not only is there are always a lot of eyes on Aaron Pico when he fights because he's such a bright prospect, but he's also fighting it. He's got the home crowd advantage in this fight. He's fighting in front of his home crowd, Aaron Pico. He's from California, fighting out of California. This event's in California. So Aaron Pico definitely isn't going to want to, you know, go 2-2, one of the brightest prospects out of California, you know, lose in front of his home crowd. That would be a terrible situation for him. And he's fighting a guy in Lee Morrison who hasn't really fought guys on Bellator level, UFC level. He was fighting for M1, didn't go great in M1. So Lee Morrison's got 19 pro wins, but I don't know if he's beat anybody on the level of an Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico, even though he's only 21 years old, only 3 pro fights, do not let that fool you. This dude, Aaron Pico, is serious, brother. So with that being said, I got Aaron Pico getting the W against Lee Morrison in front of his home crowd at Bellator 199. Then moving to what I believe is going to be the co-main event. They might switch it up, but it looks like Paul Daley versus John Fitch might be the co-main event of Bellator 199. In this fight, you can see I'm picking John Fitch. I'm surprised Bellator don't have a picture for John Fitch just because he's been around for so long, even though he hasn't fought in Bellator yet. Now, Paul Daley is 35 years old with 57 pro fights. This guy's got 20 more fights than years on this planet. These are just pro MMA fights. That's not even counting Paul Daley's striking background or anything else he did before, mixed martial arts. Paul Daley's got 57 pro MMA fights, fought for the UFC, fought for Bellator, fought for Strikeforce, fought all around the world. Paul Daley's one of the best, most experienced mixed martial arts strikers in the game. Now the thing about Paul Daley, of course, he got kicked out of the UFC, hit Josh Koscheck after the bell. They had a rivalry going into that fight, you know, and stuff like that. So he kind of didn't really get to fulfill his true potential in the UFC, got kicked out for reasons other than fighting, came over to Bellator. He's 5-2 now in Bellator, but Paul Daley has even been at odds with Bellator as of late. In his most recent interview, he talked about how he feels like, you know, lack of promotion going into this fight. You know, he said he's one of the bigger names on the card. He's not even on the commercial, stuff like that. He's been wanting the MVP fight for a while. That fell through. So, you know what I'm saying? So, Paul Daley hasn't been having the best of times, according to him, over at Bellator recently. You know, as far as the MVP fight falling through and feeling like a lack of promotion or whatever. And now he's going to be fighting John Fitch, also known as the Decisionator to some people. But John Fitch recently, you know, got one back on everyone that calls him the Decisionator, because his most recent win is actually a submission. That submission win from John Fitch, I believe, is his first submission win in his first finish in over 10 years. I believe his last finish, John Fitch's, came in the UFC back in 2007. Ever since then, it was all decision wins and such like that. So John Fitch, though, he's just a very high-level wrestler. I mean, if you've got that to rely on, if you're one of the best grapplers, if people can't get up, if you're controlling the fight, there's not much to be said about that. You know, John Fitch was one of the best welterweights in the UFC. Only person that seemed like he couldn't beat back when he was in the UFC was George St. Pierre. John Fitch, #1 contender, George St. Pierre, the champion. They fought one time. George St. Pierre won the fight. So John Fitch was always like that #1 contender, but he had such high-level grappling and wrestling, no one else could really beat him. But he was, I believe, released by the UFC, or left the UFC, went to other promotions. Now, I believe he was with the World Series of Fighting. Yeah, that's where it was. John Fitch fought 8 fights with the World Series of Fighting before coming to Bellator, where he went 6-2, John Fitch. Only 2 losses, one of them to Husam Alpar-Harris via knee bar. And his other loss was a decision, I believe. But John Fitch is a guy, very high-level grappling. He's older than Paul Daley and also less experienced. So normally I tend to root for the younger fighter if they're more experienced as well. If you're only 35 years old and your opponent's 40, and you've got more fights, I mean, you know what I'm saying? You're going to have probably the explosiveness, the athleticism, and the experience. Usually that means a lot, the younger, more experienced fighter. But this is just a really bad matchup for Paul Daly. Paul Daly's more of a striker. When he's win against the higher level grapplers, the Jake Shields and you know, the guys that are more known for their takedowns in his career, Paul Daly, the Rory McDonalds, he's lost those fights, you know what I'm saying? And that's just more because he has a striking background. He's a guy that likes to have exciting fights. He likes to stand and bang. He likes to knock dudes out or get knocked out. You know, he's one of those, he's a striker. So when you get a guy that puts him on his back, whose plan is to put him on his back, sit him down, and not let him up, it's not the best performance from Paul Daly. That's who he's going against this fight. John Fitch, hell, a lot of people talk about John Fitch or call him the American GSP. He was second fiddle to GSP because he wasn't able to beat GSP, but at the same time, that's the level of grappling we're talking about here. John Fitch being compared to George St. Pierre. And so with that being said, if John Fitch is able to get the fight down to the ground, which he should be able to if he can get a hold of Paul Daly, I think he wins this fight. But Paul Daly, in his last 7 fights, he's 5-2. And in his last 2 wins, Paul Daly, one of his knockouts was a flying knee against, I believe, Brandon Ward, if I'm not mistaken. And he's also got another win since then. And it was also a knockout. So with that being said, Paul Daly, he's going to probably have to knock John Fitch out to win this fight. On top of, well, I don't know where Paul Daly's mindset is coming into this fight. You know, he's at odds with Bellator, it seems like. He feels like it's him versus the world. He's talking about after this fight, wanting out of his Bellator contract to essentially go and fight, you know, in other promotions, which UFC's not an option. He's kicked out of the UFC. But just even if it's a local event, you know, in England, or you know what I'm saying, just to be the main event at a local promotion, he probably would feel more love than what he's feeling now. That's the sense I got. So I'm going with John Fitch to get this W. It's his first fight in Bellator. Paul Daly's more of the Bellator veteran, more experienced, younger fighter. But it is a really bad matchup for Paul Daly and John Fitch's grappling skills. He's not just any geek off the streets. He's one of the best grapplers in mixed martial arts. So, and one funny joke though about John Fitch fighting here, it's like he went 10 years without getting a finish. The very first win, his last win came via rear naked choke. His very first finish, he gets signed to a bigger promotion, right? He was the decisionator for like 10 years or whatever. Very first finish, he's getting his shot in Bellator. But, you know, it took him a little too long. But a little bit of a joke. But I am picking John Fitch to get the W. With that being said, we're moving to the main event of the evening. Ryan Bader versus King Muhammad Lawal. This fight here, I definitely got going for Ryan the Master Bader. He actually changed his nickname to Master, which is awesome. Ryan Master Bader. So Ryan Bader, UFC veteran, one of the best light heavyweights in the world, not just Bellator, in the UFC. Ryan Bader's only lost 1 out of his last 10 fights to Rumble Johnson. He left the UFC on a 2-fight winning streak, a finish over Ilir Latifi, who's looking like one of the best heavyweights / light heavyweights in the world at this point. He finished Ilir Latifi, then he beat the brakes off a Little Nog. Now he's over in Bellator, beat a guy, then he became the Bellator light heavyweight champion. Now Ryan Bader's over here fighting in the heavyweight Grand Prix against another guy who's also fought at light heavyweight. So even though King Mo's also fought at heavyweight, he shouldn't have too much of a size advantage on Ryan Bader. And even if that is the case, Ryan Bader's a legitimate light heavyweight, one of the best in the world, who could still win this fight. Ryan Bader's got 2 wins over Phil Davis, who has a win over King Muhammad Lawal. Even though that's not how MMA math works, both of these guys are pretty high-level grapplers or wrestlers, as well as Phil Davis. So when you're talking about who's the best wrestler out of the bunch, if you're just comparing their fights, Ryan Bader is probably the best wrestler or grappler in this situation. King Mo's had injury setbacks in his career. I just got this fight going for Ryan Bader. As far as my most confident pick, I probably did the less. Aside from Aaron Pico, who I expect to, you know, get the job done, Ryan Bader's probably one of my more confident picks. Probably my most confident pick in this card. So the winner of this fight advances in the heavyweight Grand Prix and will be facing Matt Mitrione. I think that's going to be Ryan Bader. I also predicted Ryan Bader in my actual Bellator heavyweight Grand Prix bracket to advance. And if he does, I'll be 4 for 4 the first round. With that being said, it is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments about Bellator 199. Are you going to be watching or just checking on the updates? Keep in mind, UFC 214, Lomachenko's fighting. A lot of shit going on. I'm going to be watching Bellator for sure, as well as the UFC. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out. And as always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell right next to it so you're notified every time I upload a video. I'm out.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking D-O-double-G.